Greetings everyone, SCOUTART here and welcome to this special event video. And witness what I'm about to say around here. As you can see, I have been a great fan of Animat, aka Matt Brunett, and many of his works, like his fascinating reviews, top 10s, and other fun stuff. But what was the most intriguing to see was the animation history videos known as animation lookbacks. Plus the fact that we were born in the same early 1990s. He has been telling stories about Disney, DreamWorks, Pixar, Hanna-Barbera, and so much more, especially the Looney Tunes, which the latter makes me think about something in particular. He may give many fascinating points about the characters and their movies, but I've always felt that something was missing in the look back that is worth mentioning, and that is indeed the other animated films besides the two hybrid films. It may not be a prominent or consistent studio like other mainstream studios, but it is still a very fascinating competitor that has been trying to top the animation studios like Disney in the modern times, especially since it did in the golden age of Hollywood and animation field with the Looney Tunes. The studio that I'm talking about in particular and in general is none other than Warner Brothers Animation. Now for this special case, we are looking back to the animated works made by the studio that once was a strong rival to Disney before DreamWorks Animation Studios, particularly the ones released in the 1990s when even musical Disney Renaissance was happening up to the decades of the 2000s, when at first it went mostly problematic and later be a little better. So with further ado, SCOUTART channel presents Warner Brothers Animation Look Back, brought essentially by a fan of Animat. Now let's start from the very beginnings. During the golden times of Hollywood in the 1930s, Warner Brothers was one of those studios that had a huge competition in the film industry along with other studios, particularly Disney or the field of animation. And as you can see, Warner Brothers was one of those studios that made some Disney wannabes cartoons. When the late 1930s came, Disney and another rival studio named Fleischer made the first animated Hollywood films, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and Gulliver's Travels. These cinematic events opened new possibilities for other studios with their animation divisions like Universal and Warner Brothers. Interestingly enough, when it comes to the latter, most of the cartoons were like musical parodies to the Disney cartoons, and even before modern times when DreamWorks Animation existed, Warner Brothers probably would have made some fun animated films mocking the Disney formula at that time. But in the end, there was one problem that alternated the potential idea for the studio and the rest of Hollywood. What was that? Three things. WW2, aka World War II. This hard event forced the other studios by reconsidering that the idea of making an animated film of their own was no longer a profitable option. Even after what happened to the other animated films like Disney's Pinocchio and Fantasia, and especially the Fleischer cartoon that opened a few days before the Pearl Harbor event, Mr. Buck Goes to Town. With that said, Warner Bros. Continued making animated short cartoons including Merry Melodies and the Looney Tunes, even when it comes to training films regarding war topics. Even after the war, Warner Bros. Still has been making cartoons with no matters of having any animated features and having a lot of fun with just making short cartoons thanks to the animation studio that was at the time Termite Terrace, later changed by their Burbank Animation Lot. However, passing through the 1950s and 60s, short cartoons were now having expensive times to be presented in theaters, and it was a time when TV entertainment was growing, and so animation business was passing from theaters to TV programming, and the last constant cartoons were released through the 60s. Funny enough, one last project in which classic Warner Bros. Artists got involved was the 1964 fantasy war film, The Incredible Mr. Limpet, a live-action film directed by Arthur Levin with animation segments directed by animator Robert Mackinson. At this point, since there is little to no information about this film, I guess we can just honorably mention about this movie, since even there is nothing mentioned about being exactly a commercial success when it got released on March 28, and just mixed results according to Rotten Tomatoes page. But at least it was mostly well considered as a fun family entertainment. This movie may have been the last project by Warner Brothers Cartoon Studios' involvement, marking the end of a golden age of theatrical cartoons. But it was technically Warner Brothers Animation's first film project, even before making the animated Looney Tunes compilation films. Moving ahead to 1980, Warner Brothers established another animation division thanks to the successful compilation animated film, The Bugs Bunny Roadrunner movie, generally known as Warner Brothers Animation, headed by cartoon sound editing veteran Hal Gear and former The Patty Freeding producer Friz Freleng, in which many animated projects would be made, including some other Looney Tunes compilation films and animated short films until 1986, when both heads stepped down and by being replaced by Stephen S. Green and occasionally The Patty's former secretary, Kathleen Helpy Shipley. And beyond that time, Warner Brothers initiated in making animated TV series by its newly established TV animation division in the early 1990s, including fun shows like Tiny Toon Adventures and action-packed shows like the DC comic-based show Batman. Keep in mind that I'm about to talk about something beyond the latter, so before that, I will mention one more thing. In the early 1990s, Warner Brothers began distributing many different animated films, starting the 1990 fantasy film based on the musical ballad The Nutcracker Prince, and the 1991 comedy film Robert Dangerfield, which it was a Rodney Dangerfield production originally planned as an R-rated animated film inspired by the works of Ralph Bakshi, but later toned down to a G rating by the executives to compete against Disney. Unfortunately, due to lack of promotion, both films were a total failure financially and even critically mixed to negative received. And trust me, the marketing topic will have something crucial beyond issues as this history goes afterwards. But as I said before, these films mentioned are just distribution examples made by Warner Brothers, plus the fact that other animated films were released by the company at the time. So the real story we're heading at the beginning of Warner Feature Animation is the time when the studio started to try and compete in the modern animation field. And technically, the first animated film released in 1993 that started a new tryout with a DC comic plus TV adaptation was none other than Batman, Mask of the Phantasm. In this animated adventure, the Dark Knight witnesses unexpected murders to criminal bosses, but he gets blamed by the selfish councilman Arthur Reeves, and at the same time, Batman, aka Bruce Wayne, deals with a hard reunion of a former girlfriend named Andrea. But when he discovers about a mysterious vigilante responsible for the murders known as the Phantasm, he must resolve the case to stop the chaotic figure in which even the villainous Joker has a twisting involvement. Now before the film's production, let me give you a little history fact. Enter Bruce Timm, the man behind the DC animated universe concept. You see, he was always fascinated in the comic books, especially the ones made from the 50s and 60s, and the Art Deco architecture style, which those elements inspired him to gain his artistic abilities. With that said, he has been working on many animated projects, including the series from Filmation, Ralph Bakshi, and even the works of Don Bluth. Tim tried to work for the DC and Marvel comics, only ending to fail since interestingly his first ambition was to become a comic book artist, and has produced several one-shot and miniseries, mostly for DC Comics in later years. Plus, in the 1980s, he made some mini-comics for his former TV animated involvement, Masters of the Universe. Anyways, back to the specific animation topic. After other projects, including his participation in the Dick animated series of Ghostbusters in the late 80s, he was later hired by the Warner Brothers Television in 1989, starting to work in the animated comedy series Tiny Toon Adventures. While enjoying himself in TV production as a designer during his time at Warner Brothers, nothing special would happen until 1991, when he and his fellow producer named Eric Radomski presented a pitch regarding an adaptation of one of the most popular DC characters, even making an animated pilot for the presentation, which in the end the studio head loved it and approved the idea of making the most popular dark animated series of all time that was praised by critics and viewers. To write the film's main plot, The 1987 miniseries comic Batman Year 2 inspired the writers to write the script, and the flashback elements were inspired by the film Citizen Kane. On a side note, despite giving Joker a crucial role, Alan Burnett wanted the story to be far more different from the show's regular rogues gallery, but also wanted to do a love story of Bruce Wayne because nobody had done it for the series, so the character Andrea Beaumont was created for the film. Originally, the crew thought of excluding the Joker during production, but co-writer Paul Dini said that the Joker was always part of the film since pre-production. With Nemesis included, the writers had to be cautious in placing him without any connection to the 1989 film when it comes to his origins, but also realizing that they could make his appearance serve the story in a way that couldn't happen in live action. To keep the Joker as a solo threat, Bruce Timm and Burnett convinced Paul to not use Harley Quinn in the film for that reason. Aiding Burnett in writing the script was Martin Pascoe, who handled most of the flashback segments. Michael Reeves, who wrote the climax, and Dini, who claims he filled the holes here and there. With the script finally finished, by 4 writers in total, and later shown to the executives, it was accepted. So the production finally was starting, but with a last-minute decision. And what do I mean with that? Well, originally the film was supposed to be a direct-to-video movie, but after presenting the acclaimed script, executives decided to release the film theatrically and gave the production time of 8 months, unlike other animated films that take 2 years of production. This gave a great challenge for the production and even surprised the producer by saying, "It was an expanded episode. We boarded the script and did all of our designs and shipped it overseas. We were treating it with more quality, but we originally didn't intend it for the big screen." With pressure for a Christmas release plus a budget of $6 million, the artists started the production in the best way possible. When it comes to the look of the film, it had to be faithful to the animated series, but in a quite cinematic way possible. Now, technically, talking about the film's production combined with the series' artistic look topic, for starters, the art elements along the character designs were inspired by the Tim Burton film and the classic Superman cartoons from the 40s. Plus, Danny Elfman's music from Tim Burton's adaptation is also what influenced the series' soundtrack. As for the character designs, while staying true to TV elements and a comic book feel, one character that had a lot of changes was the Phantasm. You see, during the story production, they had to make around 20 different versions until selecting the convincing one by the crew. The character was inspired by 2 characters that are the Green Reaper along the version that appears in the Batman Year 2 comic, and the Ghost of Christmas Future from A Christmas Carol, which the latter is even mentioned by the Joker as a reference.
Nope, I've seen the guy. He looks more like the Ghost of Christmas Future. Nowhere near as cute as Batboy.
In other words, it had to be all made by hand, including the backgrounds and animation since there was no software to digitally paint and color the drawings. Even due to the unexpected decision, the animators went over the scenes to accommodate the widescreen theatrical aspect ratio. But increased budget gave the filmmakers opportunities for more elaborated set pieces, like making the opening sequence featuring a flight through an entirely computer-generated Gotham City. By the way, when it comes to visual jokes, setting the climax when Batman and Joker fight inside a miniature model of Gotham City and look like giants themselves, this was an homage to a mainstay of Batman comic books of the Dick Sprang era, often featuring the hero fighting a backdrop of gigantic props. For the voice cast, with Andrea Romano's direction, the crew brought the stars reprising their roles including Kevin Conroy, Ephraim Zimbalist Jr., and Mark Hamill as the Joker. Other actors that joined for the new characters included Hart Bochner as the Councilman Arthur Reeves, and Dana Delany as Andrea Beaumont, who would later become the voice of Lois Lane in the Superman animated series. For the music, it was composed by Shirley Walker, the animated series composer, and cited that it was one of her favorite movie scores of her own. But unlike the series' main theme, she composed a different kind of theme music for the opening sequence, though in the same tone from the series. Plus she wrote the Latin lyrics that were based on the names of key Warner Brothers staff read backwards. Interestingly enough, Hans Zimmer, the composer who would later be known as the composer of The Lion King and especially the Christopher Nolan Batman trilogy, played the synthesizer on the score. On a side note, the end credits song I Never Even Told You, performed by Tia Carrere, was written by Sida Garrett and Glenn Ballard. From start to finish, the crew managed to complete production enough to finally release the movie after 8 months. At the same time, Warner Brothers released some merchandise of the film, which were a couple of novelizations, one written by Burnett Deeney and Andrew Helfer, while the other was written by Gary Grable. Also, DC Comics released a comic book adaptation written by Kelly Puckett and drawn by Mike Parobeck. When it was released on Christmas 1993, it was presented on 1,506 theaters, but unfortunately, it was a disappointment at the box office, earning around $1 million over its first 2 days and grossing over $5.8 million in the domestic total box office intake. The reasons for its failure was due to the obvious fact that it was for a last-minute decision of releasing theatrically the film, and additionally, the filmmakers blamed the studio for the unsuccessful marketing campaign for the same reasons, and that made the film hardly unnoticed. But despite that, there were 2 bright sides. For starters, at least it was later successful with its various home video releases. As for the audience who saw it, that would be the second bright side. It was a critical success, particularly with the critics and fans of the series, praising the animation style, story, action scenes, voice acting, and the music score, calling it stylish and admirably respectful of the source material. Batman Mask of the Phantasm succeeds where many of the live-action Batman adaptations have failed. Funny enough, Siskel and Ebert, despite praising the film, they regretted on not watching the film in theaters until they managed to view it on home video, both commenting that the film was better than Batman Returns and Joel Schumacher's Batman Forever, and only slightly below Batman. Although for some reason Siskel was not a fan of Mark Hamill's performance as the Joker. When it comes to awards, it was just one. The film was nominated for an Annie Award, which is like the Oscar but exclusively for animated works, for Best Animated Film, along with The Nightmare Before Christmas and the one that won the trophy, The Lion King. As time went by, the film became a cult classic since then, and the character Phantasm became quite popular at the same time that even made some appearances on the DC media, including a sequel comic to the film, Shadow of the Phantasm, written by Paul Dini, and even action figures, both promoting the home video release of the film. But when it comes to the latter, however, let's just say that one of the toys was a bit risky in spoiling the film's crucial plot elements. Anyways, in the first release, the film became the first and only animated DC-based film released in theaters until the animated adaptation of Batman the Killing Joke in 2016. Though that one was presented as a limited release event. Though this film failed in theaters, it still influenced in making more exclusive animated spin-off movies released on home video, some based in the animated series and others based on different comics. In later years, celebrating the 20th anniversary of the film, a film screening was held in Santa Monica with cast members Kevin Conroy, Dana Delany, and Mark Hamill presented. Sometime later, for the 25th anniversary, Phantom Events re-released the film for one day on November 12, 2018. On a side note, the film has been put to the best movie lists from many communities. Wired Scott Field called Kevin Conroy the finest Batman on record in 2009. In 2010, IGN ranked the film as the 25th best animated film of all time, but also stated that it was The Dark Knight's best big screen story, until the release of Batman Begins. And other groups, like Total Film, named it as one of the greatest animated films of all time, coming in at 47th out of 50, while Time magazine ranked it as one of the 10 best superhero films ever in 2011. In other words, this film is not only the best animated film, but is also considered by many people as one of the best Batman films, along with the other versions including The Dark Knight and the 1989 Tim Burton film. Too bad that it wasn't referenced in the later Lego Movie version.
I've seen you go through similar phases in 2016 and 2012 and 2008 and 2005 and 1997 and 1995 and 1992 and 1989 and that weird one in 1966.
Oh well, At least the film did make it to be included in the 2019 LEGO DC Super Brilliance video game as one of the levels. But even unnoticed at its release, there is no denying that this animated version has managed to become as one of the greatest underrated gems with an heroic start for Warner Bros. And DC in the best animated way possible. Sometime later in 1994, Warner Bros. Along with several Hollywood studios moved into feature animation following the success of Disney's The Lion King. Max Howard, a Disney alumnus, was brought in to head the new division, which was set up in Sherman Oaks near the television studio in nearby Glendale, California. With all settled at first, and this time preparing all the marketing in the best way possible with a bang, featuring Basketball Jam and beloved animated Looney Tunes characters. In 1996, Warner Bros. Released Space Jam. Now, before looking back to that film, I just want to mention something. You see, Matt has already talked about that film in his previous works, which was the animation Look Back on the Looney Tunes. And the two hybrid films, which is that and Back in Action, are in the honorable mention category. You can even check them out individually on his page. It's really fascinating to watch along the history of the Looney Tunes characters. But in the case of this, for the sake of this, I can somehow summarize the history of the Looney Tunes movie career, plus the fact that I can even mention some recent facts that Animat didn't mention before. As we all know, the Looney Tunes are known to be the most beloved characters in the animation comedy genre since the golden age of animation, which they had starred in many animated short films, including Merry Melodies, that 28 of them received nominations at the Oscars, with a total of 5 winners of the award. After the times of the golden age of classic animation, and now beginning the broadcast of TV shows like The Bugs Bunny Show, airing from the 60s, where has been showing the original cartoons to be enjoyed for many generations on the air until the year 2000. The characters wouldn't enter on the movie business until the late 70s, starting specifically with the animated compilation film The Bugs Bunny Roadrunner movie, also known as The Great American Chase, featuring Bugs Bunny as the host of the picture, presenting the best of the past cartoons. He even participated along with other characters, with new animated segments by renowned cartoonist Chuck Jones and his animation studio. With big success thanks to this film, Warner Bros. Made other compilation films featuring the best of their cartoons, including the Looney Bugs Bunny movie, Bugs Bunny's third movie, 1001 Rabbit Tales, Daffy Duck's Fantastic Island, and Daffy Duck's Quackbusters. Sometime later, when Warner Bros. Was starting to reboot animation competition by making and presenting new original animated films of their own, it was the studio's big opportunity of presenting the Looney Tunes to a new generation of fans, and that's what started the production of the new Looney Tunes project featuring basketball player Michael Jordan. On one hand, I would say that when I even look at this film, I can consider it as a fascinating idea representing a parallel universe, quite similar to Who Framed Roger Rabbit, but with sports. With Animat, on the other hand, he has wondered about the crazy idea of saying, and I quote, "How the fridge can you mix aliens, Looney Tunes, and basketball? It doesn't make sense." So with that said, let us find out how can make sense of the idea's origin and let it slam to the jam. After all, oh great Animat, you are my subconscious. Hit it, Matt! Oopsie! Wrong channel. Now behold and hit it, Matt! The film is about famous basketball player Michael Jordan, who decides to retire and switch sport to baseball, which he is not that good at. Meanwhile, in an amusement park world called Moron Mountain, the evil owner Mr. Swaghammer plans to take over and kidnap the Looney Tunes to entertain and attract more customers. When he sends his little alien minions known as the Nerdlucks and get challenged by the Looney Tunes, they manage to steal the talent essences of NBA players Charles Barkley, Sean Bradley, Patrick Ewing, Larry Johnson, and Maxie Bogues to officially challenge the characters for a basketball game when transformed into the Monstars. Back in the real world, Michael gets sucked into a golf hole and finds himself into the Looney Tunes universe, where he must help the characters to defeat the monsters and win the biggest basketball game event of all time. Now, to answer the interesting question, where did this idea come from in the first place? Answer: an idea based on a commercial. In the early 1990s, Warner Bros. Made a couple of hybrid Nike commercials featuring Bugs Bunny and Michael Jordan, in which one of them shows the two leads challenging Marvin the Martian and his army for a pair of Air Jordan shoes. The commercials were successfully popular that sparked an elemental idea at Warner Bros. To potentially make a sports film inspired by the basketball commercial. Not to mention that besides of Roger Rabbit, there has been some Looney Tunes media involving live action and animation, like the 1940 short film You Oughta Be in Pictures and the 1949 musical film My Dream Is Yours, featuring a Bugs Bunny cameo in a musical number. Commercial director Joe Pytka, who directed the mentioned hybrids, got involved as the film's director, and the project initially got greenlit in a plane meeting by a Nike executive and the film's producer Ivan Reitman, who previously worked as the director of the Ghostbusters movies and Stripes featuring Bill Murray, who also participated in the film as even referentially Jordan's friend Mr. Murray. And by the way, there is a true reference regarding both of them.
Mr. Murray, something's really been bugging me.
Yeah?
Just how did you get here, anyway?
Producer's a friend of mine, just had a teamster come and drop me off,
When drafting the fun concept with the script in early revisions, while the studio and the director had some reluctant experiences in modernizing Bugs Bunny, yet having the great advantage of even exploring and understanding his relevance as a slight research to tie it with Michael thanks to the success of both ads. At the same time, Warner Bros. Tried to make more adult, sophisticated material in the animated film market that deviated from the formula set by Disney, pretty much like the previous Batman animated film. At one point, the project was suddenly closed when Jordan retired from basketball in 1993, only to be reopened in 1995 when Jordan returned as a basketball player. The funny thing is that apparently they really filmed his grand return to basketball in 1995 for the final scene of the movie. Pytka was informed about the project only months before the start of principal photography. In addition of being hired as a director, he revised the script, such as a scene involving a home run that Jordan does when he returns to Earth that ultimately was cut from the film. Writer Spike Lee was also interested in helping Pytka with the screenplay, but Warner Bros. Blocked him from the project out of dissatisfaction with how he funded the 1992 movie Malcolm X. Speaking of the cast and performances, besides Bill Murray and crucially Michael Jordan for the lead live-action role as himself, since originally there were also intentions of casting with a more experienced actor for his part, which didn't work since there was nobody better than him for the role, it was not that easy to do due to the fact that it had a crazy premise for many people, and the easiest actors to hire were most likely NBA players, except player George Morrison. At first, regarding some movie celebrities, Pytka thought of either Michael J. Fox or Chevy Chase, who the latter previously worked with Pytka on some Doritos commercials, for the role of Stan, but Warner Bros. Rejected both options and got Wayne Knight instead. Speaking of celebrities and high involvement, for the voice casting, producer Reitman wanted the voices for the established characters far better than Mel Blanc, and not just replications. Originally, casting directors wanted several celebrities to make voice cameos, even most likely the animated characters, but in the end, those intentions didn't work, but getting one actor for the role of Mr. Schwackhammer, who at first was thought as a live-action character until changed in the last days of development. Originally, it was thought of Jack Palance to voice the villain, thanks to an animation test, but it did not work and it was given to Danny DeVito instead. Talking about the animated characters, originally Noel Blanc, aka the son of voice legend Mel Blanc, was going to provide the male voices of the Looney Tunes, But unfortunately, due to conflicting negotiations on Warner Bros. By disagreeing a contract, he was replaced by other voice actors including D. Bradley Baker, Bob Bergen, Cat Susie, and Bill Farmer, never again reprising their roles until most of them, specifically the former three mentioned, do reprise certain characters in much later appearances. Fun fact is that one of the sport elements, like the use of the ball used by the Nerdlux, is a special ball treasured by the director that the crew secretly took since it was touched and probably used by the most famous NBA players. And it was even modeled in CGI for effects when grabbed by the cartoons. Speaking of effects, this was one of the first film productions to be shot in a virtual studio, and when Michael was cast and began filming his scenes, he had to train daily to stay in great shape for his basketball scenes, especially in the animated universe by lifting weights and even playing with other basketball players in a court of Long Beach University temporarily moved to the WB studio lot. And so when it was moment to film his actions and especially the highlighting basketball scenes in the animated environment, he had to play and act inside a large green screen room against green suit stunt actors, portraying as the physical performances of the animated characters that Michael can interact, all green suited for the animated sequences except for the eyes. Similar to most likely ninjas in a way. With later additional production credits by Ron Tip and officially the first female-involved producer Alison Abate, including animation directed by Tony Cervoni and Bruce W. Smith, with Jerry Reese originally involved but then unexpectedly let go after contacting and recruiting Smith afterward, yet still manageably credited, and a whole animation crew that always admired the cartoons. When developing the character designs, the process involved the animators and artists using the original cartoons as references. Ultimately, they went with Bob Clampett's 1940s style of animation and design due to being much wilder than Chuck Jones, despite also being most likely inspired by his elements of cartoony animation plus comedy. Speaking of design, specifically on the new characters, on one side there are creatively the alien characters with Looney Tunes based aspects, especially Mr. Shraghammer and the Nerdlux, who the latter show 5 colorful main ones from little cartoony alien to a huge muscled cartoon player impersonating the renowned NBA players that they are based on, specifically the real mentioned players. On the other hand, since this is officially a Looney Tunes movie, the crew had to create a brand new character for the Looney family, and that happens to be Lola Bunny. Originally, Honey Bunny was going to be featured in Space Jam as Bugs' love interest and companion, who previously appeared in some animated Looney Tunes media, commercials, and comic books. But before technically pre-production began, her inclusion had to be scrapped due to being very similar to Bugs. Not to mention that unlike Minnie Mouse, it was obvious that he used many of those aesthetics to comically screw up and trick Elmer Fudd in many cartoons. So a few months later, the crew along with artists Leo Benvenuti and Steve Rudnick managed to conceptually redesign the basic female idea of replacing and most likely transforming Honey into a brand new looking character officially updated as Bugs' new and official love interest named Lola, with a variety of explorations on her personality and looks. At first, her first pitched look update was named Lola Rabbit, but when presenting her to the heads, especially the McDonald's market members who signed a contract to sell Happy Meal merchandise, they demanded to constantly modify her because she looked like a male teenager with less girly elements and would have been wrong to have Bugs Bunny paired up with her questionable aspect, that they would even refuse to sell toys based on her character if not changed. So when the crew explored more on updating her designs, she gradually had more details for her attractive beauty with her eyes and characteristics combined of a skillful teenager and a strong sport lady, with an aspect reminiscent yet colorfully contrasted to Bugs with tan fur, blonde bangs, and a yellow tank top plus a rubber band on both ears like a ponytail. Not to mention that at one point, the crew wanted in her early designs, yet the semi-official one, to have a resemblance to the female character from the Tiny Toons adventures, Babs Bunny, and with a different name put as Bunny Bunny, until it was changed back into the name Lola. Eventually, the modifications were made and the now renamed Lola Bunny was approved. For the mix of live action and animation, the crew additionally brought Academy Award winning effects artist Edward Jones,
who previously collaborated on Who Framed Roger Rabbit, to work on the visual effects with his studio CineSight. Now regarding the perspective of how the team had to craft the animation hybrid process, like Matt once previously mentioned, co-director Bruce Smith explained best. It's not one medium with another constantly. There's animation with the CG environment, animation in the traditional environment, live action in the CG environment, and live action in the animated environment. In a certain way, this was innovatively unlike the craftsmanship done in Roger Rabbit. Now with more computers plus animation collaboration from around 700 artists from 18 studios in London, Canada, California and Ohio, the animators used the great advantage of animating frame by frame and scanning the drawings, along with some hand-painted backgrounds without the use of hand-painting cells. And thanks to the Amino software, it made an easier process for the artists to digitally color the characters and giving them the necessary shading and lighting elements to have more depth. Also, besides having some more CGI animation, especially when the live-action characters get cartoony actions with the use of a cybercam that translates digitally the actors in a most likely similar way to motion capture, though as one of the early uses of that technique. Plus having shots of animated characters in the live-action environments with practical effects in the same way as Roger Rabbit, though with some digitally modeled objects. The software gave them the opportunity of experimenting with more CGI environments, like Moron Mountain, and the highlighting basketball court to blend the 2D animated characters and the green screen shots featuring Jordan and the monsters, who the latter were additionally animated with the use of referential shots from the green-suited players. But the most challenging additions that the crew had to do in the three-dimensional stadium was everything around it. Meaning that they had to put thousands of different cartoon characters with random obscure cameos for over 25,000 seats as an entire audience. To achieve that, with a program devised by FX supervisor Carlos Arguello, they had to use the copy-paste tricking technique by spreading different characters in different seats with a few random clones, especially changing bodies and heads all around the stadium, even with some live-action bodies and costumes, while applauding in the audience. So when they are unfocused, it gives them the perfect full audience effect. Funny enough, like Animat once mentioned, if it was just copying and pasting characters without much change, it would have been very noticeable like a repeated video game crowd. Not to mention that this film overall broke records by applying more than 1,000 compositions and effects shots in a major feature film, compared to the 2-hour summer blockbuster film Independence Day released on the same 1996 year with its 700 effects shots. Anyway, to promote the film, this time Warner Bros. Successfully marketed a variety of merchandise that even included Air Jordans, Looney Tunes shirts, video games, even a DC comic book adaptation, and like I said before, Happy Meal toys and deluxe sandwiches with stuffed characters from McDonald's, with the official inclusion of Lola Bunny. When the film was finally jamming into the big screen on November 15, 1996, it became the first WB production released by Warner Bros. Feature Animation, and when it comes to the critical reception, it was mostly mixed, with critics praising the technical innovation of blending live action and animation, the basketball scenes, humor, performances, especially from Jordan's, and even praising the faithful portrayal of the Looney Tunes. But on the other hand, they were not fully graced on the crazy concept based on a commercial and the storyline. Critics like Leonard Maltin, Todd McCarty, and Siskel and Ebert had a lot of fun with the film for pretty much the same reasons. However, one celebrity who ironically criticized the film was none other than the animation influence Chuck Jones. He was not a fan of the film since he considered that most of the dialogues were things that the characters wouldn't say and that Bugs Bunny would have easily managed in handling the monsters all by himself. Then again, we could say that the film was a special occasion in Looney Tunes standards. But despite the polarizing reception, it was a huge box office hit with around $90 million domestically and $230.4 million worldwide, against the budget of $80 million. Becoming the third highest grossing sports film and the highest grossing basketball film of all time. When it comes to the soundtrack, releasing two different albums, one from the composer of the film score James Newton Howard and the other containing exclusively the pop songs made for the movie. The latter album also became a success by topping number 2 on the US Billboard 200, with the title song Space Jam ranking number 37 on the Billboard Hot 100, along several songs ranking a variety of national and international charts, including the updated version Fly Like an Eagle performed by Seal, For You I Will performed by Monica, and especially the highlighting song I Believe I Can Fly performed by R. Kelly, becoming a massive hit and reaching at number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 1 on Billboard R&B Singles chart. The song won 3 Grammy Awards, including Best Male R&B Vocal Performance, Best R&B Song, and Best Song Written for Visual Media, with a couple of additional nominations for Best Record and Best Song of the Year. And conveniently separating the art from the later controversial artist, it still remains as one of Kelly's most memorable singles that even ranked at 406 on Rolling Stone's list of the 500 greatest songs of all time in 2004. Speaking of other recognitions, the film itself received an Annie Award for Technical Achievement and 3 additional nominations for Best Directing, Best Producing, and Best Animated Film. The film would also have a promotional website that even after over 20 years would still be available to the public, kind of like a time capsule to the early times of the internet, like Animat mentions. Afterwards, some of the Monstars would make a cameo appearance in the Animaniacs and Pinky and the Brain crossover parody special Star Warners, and Michael would still join the Looney Tunes in some MCI commercials. As for Lola Bunny, she will become a member of the Looney Tunes family, appearing in some commercials, video games, and a cameo appearance in the direct-to-video movie Tweety's High Flying Adventure, even having several TV appearances, including a little version of herself in Baby Looney Tunes, a spin-off character called Lexi Bunny in Lunatics Unleashed, and prominent comedic roles in the Looney Tunes show and Wabbit, aka the new Looney Tunes. As time went by, the movie itself became a huge cult classic that even gained appreciation from newcomers of sports and Looney Tunes. In 2016, celebrating the 20th anniversary, the film was re-released in selected nationwide theaters as part of Phantasm events. And the Michael Jordan brand, with an association of Foot Locker, released a couple of hybrid commercials featuring basketball player Blake Griffin and Bugs Bunny against the Monstars and Marvin the Martian. The movie has been considered as one of the greatest sports films of all time, and honorably considered as one of the finest examples of digitally mixing live action with 2D animation in a similar way to Roger Rabbit, which made an awesome legacy of reintroducing the characters to newcomers and sparking a fun interest in basketball, showing that the entire world, including myself and especially Animat plus others, is ready to jam. But there is one curiosity like someone already questioned. Would this event happen again? With that question said, the answer is yes!
Okay, for the next part, it could be quite questionable for some people since the next film that I'm going to talk about wasn't exactly or entirely made by Warner Brothers, but at the same time, it was later merged into the animation studio at the last needed times. To know what I'm talking about, let's talk about Turner Feature Animation. Before the success of Space Jam, a Turner Entertainment-run studio that spun off from Hanna-Barbera was already producing animated films following the success of Disney features. The first was The Pagemaster, a fantasy adventure live-action animated film featuring the performances of Macaulay Culkin and Christopher Lloyd. Released by 20th Century Fox, the film was a financial and critical failure during its holiday release of 1994. After the merger with Turner and Warner Bros. Parent Time Warner in 1996, Turner Feature Animation started its second and last feature, plus the only fully animated film partially made by the studio, and mostly made to the finish by Warner Bros. Animation, technically making it as the next WB animated project for a 1997 release. That film was Cats Don't Dance. It's the story of Danny, an inspiring dancing cat who has a dream to become a great Hollywood star and meets many animal actors who join him, including a secretary cat named Sawyer, since many of them previously had broken dreams. But the bratty child actress Darla Dimple and her giant butler Max are determined to ensure that the gang will never get a chance and ruin her reputation. So it is up to Danny and his animal gang wits to show their talents to the world. At the beginning of its production in 1993, the film was launched as a vehicle for Michael Jackson. That's right, the singer Michael Jackson, who would star, produce, and be a consultant in the music and choreography. It would have been a hybrid live-action CGI film, but in 1994, Jackson left the project. Sometime later, the project was put in the hands of former Disney animator Mark Dindal, making this as his directorial debut, and ironically, this is someone who would later return to Disney to make other films like The Emperor's New Groove and, of course, Chicken Little. Another person that was involved in the project was David Kirschner, the producer of animated films like An American Tail, Once Upon a Forest, and the previously mentioned The Pagemaster. In its earlier stages, the film originally concerned less anthropomorphic yet talking cats that live among the sets and studio backlots from classic films like Casablanca, East of Eden, and The Music Man, in a similar way to other animated films like Disney's Lady and the Tramp, or even 101 Dalmatians. But during production, management at Turner Feature Animation changed repeatedly, and each head that came in attempted to take drastic revisions, including updating the setting to the 1950s rock and roll era, until it was later decided to change another setting element. Now regarding the situation, director Dindal stated, "It's pretty hard to try and keep what you have finished so far, and then suddenly transition into a different period or introduce a different character or have a completely different ending that doesn't seem to fit the beginning you have." With that in mind, he and his crew finally thought of a perfect setting representing the 30s and 40s era for the final film, along with the story written in a fun new direction, including the timeless positive message and social race commentary about giving everyone a chance to do his or her best by pursuing what they truly love. Kind of like a topic toward black or international people, but instead of racial people, it would be anthropomorphic animals in the human world. On a side note, Kirschner additionally suggested by making the film as an American tribute to the classic Hollywood movie musicals. For the visual style of the movie, the artists had to make character designs for the animals and humans reminiscent to classic cartoons like the Looney Tunes, with some stylized shapes, including the smooth use of squash and stretch and the choreography for the character animation. And apparently, this was one of the first non-Disney animated films to paint digitally the characters. Also, the goal for making the visual aspects was like an homage to the golden age of Hollywood, like the settings, backgrounds, and even including caricatured cameos from past celebrities, especially when the main character imitates them.
Meow. Meow. You ain't never meow. Meow, see? Yeah, that's it. Meow. Meow.
Plus there has been some 3D elements for the use of vehicles and a giant Darla parade balloon for the climactic scene. Speaking of Darla and celebrities, periodically, character Darla Dimple was a reference to the classic child actress Shirley Temple. But interestingly, I wonder why in most of her sketches and some scenes, she looks very creepy like Chucky. Oh, yes, that makes perfect sense. This was also a David Kirschner production. That explains it when it comes to a similar comparison of the original Child's Play trilogy. Oh well, we can already imagine that Darla was possessed by Charles Lee Ray. Funny fact is that for the creation of Max, besides giving him a creepy aspect reminiscent to Frankenstein, he was made as a reference to the butler character Max von Mayerling from the 1950s movie Sunset Boulevard. Anyways, for the voice casting, the crew brought Quantum TV series star Scott Bakula as Danny, after thinking that he would be perfect for the speaking and singing role due to his musical performances in Broadway before working on TV and movies. When it comes to furry female lead Sawyer, at first Renee Zellweger was cast to be her voice,
but in the end they selected Nancy Giles, who was originally her speaking voice, while Natalie Cole provided the singing voice due to her beautiful charm and romance through her singing style. However, when it comes to the former, despite having a similar voice to the singer but much deeper, during the 90% of the production completion, she was replaced by Jasmine Guy, a TV actress known for her role in the series A Different World. Other actors involved in the movie, including George Kennedy, Hal Holbrook, Renee Auberjonois, John Rhys Davies, Kathy Najimy, Don Knotts, and Betty Lou Gerson in her final role, provided the voices of most of the human and animal characters, since many had experiences in acting for radio and animation, which the producer thought that their expressive performances would give each character an individual personality. On a side note, when it comes to young actors, the voice of Darla Dimple was provided by then-child actress Ashley Peldon, who has been acting since she was a toddler and later seen in the Oscar-nominated drama The Crucible, while her singing voice was provided by Lindsay Ridgway. Interestingly enough, for the voice of Podge, that came by unexpected chance. As you can see, when Dindal and his crew were having lunch break at an outdoor cafe one day, a little boy named Matthew Herod appeared to ask directions. So after answering him and starting to leave, they all realized that his voice was a perfect fit for the role. So they rushed after him and asked if he'd ever acted, which he hadn't, and if he'd like to, which he would. So with that said, the rest was history. Speaking of Little Podge, originally he was supposed to be a parrot named Tyler in his early production sketches, but then drastically changed into a cute chubby bird form until the crew decided to replace and transform his parrot form into a cuddly penguin for the final cut, and so the name Podge was renamed. Originally, Dindal wanted to hire a professional actor to provide the voice of Max, but unfortunately due to budget cuts, he had to use his own demo track voice that was never intended to be heard on the film, and so by the end of the day, his voice worked enough for the role. The score was composed by Steve Goldstein, while the musical numbers at one point, stage composers David Shire and Richard Maltby Jr. wrote the songs for the film's early version of the production, but after going to a new direction in the film's concept, they were replaced by songwriter Randy Newman, the composer of many Disney Pixar films including Toy Story, James and the Giant Peach, and later another 2D animated musical film, The Princess and the Frog. So when he was aboard, he wrote songs that gently poked fun at the idealism of the 1930s cinema, while capturing the melodic, danceable sound that has made so many of those songs from Hollywood into classics. On a side note, when it comes to other musical points, the choreography elements put for the characters' dance performances given for the animators and artists were contributed by none other than Gene Kelly. That's right, the same musical legend from Singing in the Rain and other musical classics starring him. He was involved as a creative choreographer consultant for the feature, but sadly passed away a year before the film's completion and was one of his last musical projects. Although not credited, this film was dedicated to him. Another song that was included, Our Time Has Come, performed by James Ingram and Carney Wilson and written by Martin Page, was made for the opening and closing scenes of the feature, while the pop song I Do Believe, written by Will Jennings and Simon Climie, was made for the end credits. And so for the final touches, including probably video, sound editing, and other elements necessary for post-production, were technically crafted by Warner Bros. In 1996, when Turner got merged into Warner Bros. Feature Animation after co-founder Ted Turner sold all of his companies to Time Warner. So at this point, we can say that when Turner and Warner Bros. United into one, that made officially into a Warner Bros. Animation division in charge of the project during post-production. Additionally, for the film's release time, they included an animated short film featuring Foghorn Leghorn, Pulitzer Prize, produced by Chuck Jones. With all things said and prepared, when the film was released on March 26, 1997, the film unfortunately was a great failure for the numbers. With a standard budget of $32 million, on its opening weekend, the film only made around $900,000 and then finally grossing around $3.6 million domestically, making this a huge box office bump. One of the reasons for its failure was due to the lack of marketing and promotion.
So unlike what they did with Space Jam, the only thing that Warner Bros. Could promote was with Subway meals. The more inconsistent promoting happens from this moment again, the more things get ironically interesting, and this is only the beginning of the problem that the studio is facing. Trust me, you will know shortly what I mean after this. On the other hand, despite the commercial issue, it was mostly enjoyed by critics and audiences, praising the colorful animation, fast-pacing humor, voice acting, and soundtrack, even many calling it as a perfect family entertainment and the freshest, funniest animated film since Disney's Aladdin. When it comes to awards, despite not having an Oscar nomination, it did receive 8 nominations at the Annie Awards, winning 2 awards including Best Music for Randy Newman and historically, Best Animated Film, making it the first non-Disney animated film to receive the prestigious animation award. On a weird side note, however, one award event that was not happy with the film, despite the positive reception in general, was the Stinkers Bad Movie Awards, something similar to the Razzie Awards, which filled the movie under the Founders Award in 1997, citing it as loud, unfunny, and completely over the heads of its intended audience. But despite that fact, who cares? My reaction would be the same as Sylvester Cat against that madness. As time went by, the film itself became an underrated cult classic, and in 2016, regarding its home media, the film was released under the Warner Archive Collection Special Edition DVD, with a widescreen format for the first time in North America. Interestingly enough, many fans have analyzed that this and Disney's 2016 adventure film Zootopia have something in common regarding social allegory. But even before Zootopia existed in later years, there was a first animal movie with a social commentary, and this movie additionally proved indeed how fun and entertaining can be Hollywood when cats and other animals become legendary stars in their own right to the world in a metaphorical yet musical way. Besides being considered as one of the best animated films of all time, this official musical animated Cats movie has proved indeed that nothing's gonna stop them now. Moving a year later, the next WB title will be the first project entirely made by the same feature animation studio after Space Jam, but this time with a touch of musical fantasy element with a title known as Quest for Camelot, based on the King's Damasul novel by Vera Chapman, also known as The Magic Sword in the UK. Set in the fantastic times of wizards and knights, King Arthur's sword Excalibur has been stolen by the vengeful Black Knight and former Round Table member Sir Ruber in order to threat and conquer the kingdom with the help of his pet griffin, who accidentally loses it in the Forbidden Woods. Meanwhile, Candy, a farm girl with a wish since childhood of becoming a knight and follow the steps of his deceased father, knows about Excalibur being stolen. But Ruber and his minions, transformed later into a metallic army, attack her home and take her family as hostages for his plans of getting back to Camelot. After managing her escape and overhearing the missing Excalibur whereabouts, it is up to her, along with the help of a blind warrior named Garrett, his guiding falcon Aiden, and a comedic two-headed dragon by the names Devon and Cornwall, on the journey quest to find Excalibur and save Camelot. Starting production back in May 1995, the film was loosely based on Vera Chapman's novel and was Warner Bros. Feature Animation's first announced project, but at the same time, it had a very different presentation plus story. It was originally titled The Quest for the Grail, with Oscar-nominated animator Bill Kroyer and Belgian animator Frederic Duchow as the directors, while Bill's wife Sue Kroyer serving as co-producer. The early draft of the story centered around a brave lady named Susanna who embarks on a dangerous quest for the Holy Grail to save her sister from a ruthless and powerful knight. Fun fact is that for the film version, from early to final production, the antagonist had a much bigger role than in the novel. In other words, originally, the film even had a much darker approach, and it was intended to be a PG-13 rated animated film, like other epic fantasies, especially in the veins of Ralph Bakshi's Wizards. In that same year, the production officially started before the story being finalized, but during the fall of that time, most of the animators were recruited for the animation of Space Jam. As production went by, however, the story went through several changes, unfortunately causing creative differences between the studio management and the Croyer couple. In the end, the latter ended up being fired by President Max Howard in the middle of 1996, promoting Du Chow as the solo director of the film. So after their departure, two leading animators along with several art department members left the project, and then initial producer Frank Gladstone left as well and was replaced by Dalisa Cohen the following year. You see, at this point is where the chaos at the studio has started to happen and reveal itself beyond the pieces of information. The studio executives ironically had no consistent idea of what to do during production and were desperate to be like Disney Studio. Even the lead effects animator Michel Gagne regarded his tough experience on the production by saying that people were giving up. The head of the layout was kicked out, the head of the background, the executive producer, the director, the associate producer, all the heads rolled. It's kind of a hard environment to work in. What was even crazier is that the studio had big priorities in making the animated film into a musical after acknowledging the success Disney was having at the time with The Lion King, that they even asked to reduce its tone into a more musical fantasy style in the same way to the Mouse's Company. To craft the film's look and production design, the artists had to put many fantastic elements, especially traveling to the UK by studying and sketching the ancient Celtic sites to incorporate images from farm fields, enchanted forests, and thousand-year-old stone carvings into the visual themes of the movie. For the character designs, there have been many creative liberties when it comes to some creatures, especially the mystical ones, like dragons, griffins, the rock ogre, and even the transformed minions that mostly didn't end up in the final film. As for the humans, on one hand, they were naturally made with clothing and aspects representing the epic fantasy times of Camelot with a unique style, but on the other hand, due to the changes seriously asked by the executives, most of the designs were professionally yet drastically modified on the characters with Disney-esque elements. Apparently the most noticeable is the female protagonist who has a comparison to Belle from Beauty and the Beast. Then again, most of the artists had Disney feature animation experience, so that can be quite understandable. For the voice cast, the crew brought many recognizable stars, although most of them ended up being replaced by other celebrity names. Particularly, the main characters, like Nicole Kidman and Jennifer Aniston, were considered for the role of Kaylee, but that part was given to actress Jessalyn Golsing, and her singing voice was provided by Andrea Corr. When it comes to Garrett, they either fought Leonardo DiCaprio, Michael J. Fox, and Jeff Goldblum to be the voice of the character, but actor Cary Elwes ended up getting the role, while Ryan White would be his singing voice. If I can be very honest, giving the English accent for the two main characters when they speak and then singing with an American accent can be quite a debatable idea. Originally, the crew either thought of John Cleese or Rowan Atkinson to be the voice of Devon, while Dennis Miller or Steve Martin would be the voice of Cornwall. But in the end, both roles were given to Monty Python comedian Eric Idle and comic actor Don Rickles respectively, who the latter previously voiced Mr. Potato Head from Toy Story. Interestingly enough, for the villain Sir Rubber, James Woods and Tommy Lee Jones were both considered for the role. As for the character King Arthur, Christopher Reeve was considered and even cast from the early beginning of production, despite his paralysis. But, due to their unavailability plus scheduling issues for the former, Gary Oldman took the role of Rubber, while Reeve, due to his renewed activity plus unavailability, got replaced by Pierce Brosnan. Other members included were Jane Seymour as the speaking voice of Lady Juliana, Bronson Pinchot, Gabriel Byrne, Jaleel White, Frank Welker, and Sir John Gielgud, which this, along the film Elizabeth, would be one of his last film roles. For the soundtrack, the crew brought composer Patrick Doyle, who is known for his Oscar-nominated music for movies like Hamlet and Sense and Sensibility, and later other animated films like Disney Pixar's Brave, to compose the score of the film. When it comes to the musical numbers, since the company was now expecting a huge impact with a song like they did with Space Jam's I Believe I Can Fly, plus they were motivated to be like a Disney competition, award-winning composers David Foster and Carol Bayer Sager, who is one of the executives' wife, were attached to compose several songs for the film.
with collaboration from artists singing the pop versions at the credits, including Leanne Rimes, Andrea Bocelli, Steve Perry, aka the singing voice of Arthur, and Celine Dion, who is also the singing voice of Juliana. After preparing the dialogues and designs, the animators worked on moving the characters with dimensional models as references at the main Warner Bros. Feature animation facility located in Glendale, California and London, England, where a London facility was opened for over 50 animators to create 20 minutes of animation and then sent to California for digital ink and paint, with a quarter of the additional overseas animation made by other studio companies from Texas, Denmark and Canada, where the latter assisted the cleanup process at Josa Animation Company. For the effects, there were two types, one for mostly the magical and naturalistic elements like smoke, steams, plants, liquids, fire, water, and other hand-drawn things including the mystical lights, all generally crafted by previously mentioned FX artist Michel Gagne. While the second type will be the CGI elements, with texturing details that are some of them, like the round table plus its environment, the Celtic stones of Excalibur, and particularly the giant rock ogre by using the early software Silicon Graphics alias Research, a 3D animation program that was used for special effects in some live-action movies, and the crew were determined to experiment the two mediums by combining reality and fantasy, later known as Autodesk Maya. But still, despite smoothly having the materials to craft the animation and production moving forward, at the same time the artists were still having trouble with the company mismanagement, like poor timing on meeting deadlines and other random stuff like cost overruns and production nightmares that led the studio to reconsider their commitment to feature animation, and they even changed the release date from November 1997 to May 1998 in order to give the production team more time to finish the film. Other artists that shared the same problematic experience was Crystal Clavandi, Garrett's lead animator, by saying, "It was top-heavy. All the executives were happily running around and playing executive, getting corner offices, but very few of them had any concept about animation at all, about doing an animated film. It never occurred to anybody at the top that they had to start from the bottom and build that up. The problems were really coming at the inexperience of everyone involved. Those were people from Disney that had the idea that you just said, do it, and it gets done. It never occurred to them that it got done, because Disney had an infrastructure in place, working like a clockwork. We didn't have that." Funny enough, another animator that witnessed the chaos was Lauren Foste. Yes, the same woman who created the latest version of My Little Pony, by mainly saying, like I technically said, "Warner Brothers did not know what they were doing. They didn't care about animation being as an art form as well as entertainment. They wanted profits. If they wanted a bad Disney knockoff, they should have talked to Don Bluth on their part." I had to be brave for this part because she had a long speech. Before releasing the film, the company was accompanied by a promotional campaign with licenses including Wendy's and even Scholastic to produce books based on the movie, plus managing in having action figures and plushies as well. When it was finally presented as the first fully animated film under Warner Bros. Feature Animation and released on Memorial Day 1998, it was not a good sign at any part. With a budget of $40 million, the film grossed $6 million on its opening weekend in third place, ultimately grossing $22.5 million during its domestic run and ended up on a total of $38.1 million worldwide, making it a huge box office bump. One of the main reasons for its failure was due to the competition with other films released at that time like Deep Impact and The Horse Whisperer. But then again, it was most likely again due to the marketing issues. As for its critical reception, it got some negative mixed reviews with criticism towards its narrative, characters, inconsistent animation, humor, and music elements by being derivative to the Disney Renaissance animated films, even considering the film inferior to another non-Disney animated film, Anastasia, and I guess we can also say that it was inferior to Cats Don't Dance.
While some of the elements like fantasy visuals and soundtrack were mostly praised, that even most of the voice acting, particularly on Idol and Rico's performances, plus the animation quality, were appreciated by other reviews like Variety and San Francisco Chronicles, and both considered the film in general as an enjoyable fantasy adventure with quite charming elements. Other marketing promotions that made before its release was an audiobook featuring a couple of new songs on a CD included, a Game Boy Color adaptation of the film, a PC activity game, and even a staged adaptation opened at Six Flags Great Adventure called Quest for Camelot Nights, where they show musically live characters, movie clip projections from water curtains, and fireworks. Plus, originally there were other plans like making a touring attraction with different locations for the Six Flags Fiesta Texas and a GameCube adaptation after its release, but due to the bad results at the box office, those latter plans were eventually cancelled. As for the stage play at the other Six Flags, originally treated as a one-season event, it was then given to it around with 3 more seasons until 2001, due to the film's popularity. Speaking of which, despite the reception, the film did receive some positive things later on. The soundtrack album managed to be quite successful by getting picked at number 117 on the Billboard's 200, and most of the songs achieved getting popularity like Steve Perry's I Stand Alone, Looking for Your Eyes by Rhymes, and the song The Prayer performed by Dion and Bocelli in duet and single male version, which both latter songs achieved getting different top Billboard and music community charts. When it comes to awards, the film received 2 Annie Award nominations including Best Animated Effects for Michel Gagne and Best Animated Film, losing both to Disney's Mulan. Other awards that the film received was an Oscar nomination for Best Original Song with The Prayer, losing the award to the song When You Believe from The Prince of Egypt. But it managed to win a Golden Globe for Best Song, making this overall the first animated film by Warner Bros. To gather such high recognition. As time went by, the film later became quite a nostalgic cult classic for most viewers, thanks to the subject of home media, with promotions collaborated by different services from American Express, Coinstar, and even UNICEF, which advertised its trick-or-treating donation boxes before Halloween arrived at the time of its first video release, even releasing a sing-along video. On a side note, The Prayer went on and became a more recognizable track of its own for special events without necessarily knowing the film's existence for most people. Plus, the American Film Institute recognized it as one of the greatest movie songs of all time by adding it to the AFI 100 Years 100 Songs nomination list. Interestingly enough, the WatchMojo site placed the film on its alphabetical list of the greatest animated films of all time. A very questionable choice, but then again, by the time I record this, it remains as the only animated film starting with the letter Q that has some positive quality. The film may not have made much impact since its release due to the mismanagement and trying to be like Disney, but it still made some fascinating magic of nostalgic power thanks to some unforgettable songs that stand alone on their own.